Psalm 2. We're told in verse 12 that this should not be translated as kiss the Son. Nash kuvar in Hebrew should not be translated as kiss the Son. And it's only King James and modern fundamentalist Christian translations that read it that way. Well, first, that's not accurate. There are rabbinic interpreters, medieval rabbinic interpreters, that recognize it as saying son. Aramaic for son is bar. Abraham ibn Ezra recognizes that. One among some Hebrew commentaries through the centuries that do, but the foremost I draw attention to. So it's not just some fundamentalist Christian translation, but it does raise lots of issues. I mean, bar is Aramaic for Hebrew. Why not say ben? And if you wanted to say kiss the Son, why not say kiss the Son with ben, with Hebrew? Because ben, beni, you are my son. Today I've given you birth. Why not say ben, like it's referenced elsewhere in the Psalm? There are problems with it. The ancient translations, the ancient Greek, the ancient Aramaic and Syriac and Latin that struggle with these words. What did they actually mean? Some critical scholars say the text is corrupt and it's actually, this word got disconnected from this and you put it around like here, and you come out with something that says with reverence, kiss his feet, and that's what it means. It's brilliant reconstruction of putting this here and putting this here and moving it around. But number one, there's no evidence for it, and number two, it ultimately doesn't even work grammatically. This technically, we should have had a lamen instead of a beit if you wanted to follow the old emendation of Alfred Berthollet. For those for whom that has meaning, wonderful. Otherwise, dig into it more in Volume 3 of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. But let's look at the most obvious things here and see if perhaps this rendering of kiss the Son could be an accurate one. Let's look at this. Number one, Psalm 2 is most likely a coronation psalm. A psalm that would have been spoken over King David at his coronation and then most likely spoken over subsequent Judean kings at their coronation. A psalm that begins, Lamarag shu goyim lumim yegurik. Why are the nations in turmoil and the peoples contemplating a vain thing? Yatzvu malchei aretz roznim nosdu yachad. The kings of the earth gather together and the rulers joined together as one against the Lord and against his anointed. We're going to cast off their bonds. We're going to cast off their rule. Who are they fighting against? The Lord, Yahweh, and his Mashiach, his anointed one. So this is spoken as if there is a rule, there is a reign of David or a Judean king over the nations. And this rule is the rule of Yahweh through his anointed one. And people say, we're going to cast that off. Now, if this was spoken over an earthly king, a Judean king, when Judah was small and weak and wasn't ruling over anyone, it would almost seem kind of embarrassing. But that would be the hope, that there would be this messianic reign, this messianic kingdom. And of course, each king would fail and fall short, and then you realize, okay, it's speaking of the Messiah. Some rabbinic interpretations say this is about the Messiah and about David. It's about David first and then the Messiah. It's about both of them. And I believe there's truth to that. It finds its ultimate application in the Messiah, but I believe there's truth to that. Others would say it's a psalm, other rabbinic interpretation, that every time Israel is threatened by its enemies, that this is a psalm that, in a sense, repeats itself in its meaning. But bear in mind the context. Everyone wants to fight against and break off the rule of the Lord and his anointed one. The rule of Yahweh is being expressed through his anointed king. Now, it goes on to say that as they are going to cast off these bonds and throw them off, Yoshev Hashemayim Yischak, he who sits in the heavens laughs, mocks them. Adonai Yil'ag Lamo, the Lord holds them in derision. Az Yidaber Lemo V'apo, then he'll speak to them in his anger, Uvacharono Yivahalemo, and terrify them with his wrath. V'ani nasachti malki al Tzion har kodshi, I have appointed my king on Zion, my holy hill. Asapra el chok, I will declare the decree. Adonai amar li, alai. The Lord has said to me, B'ni ata ani hayom yolaticha. You are my son. Today I've given you birth. This is God's answer to the nations. This is God's answer to those who say, we're going to cast off the yoke of the anointed one and the Lord. God says, oh yeah, I've appointed my king. I've appointed my anointed one as my son. Today I've given you birth. Now, this could be applied spiritually, and it is in the New Testament, to the Messiah's resurrection, as then being appointed as the great anointed king for the world to say, God to say to the world, it's over. Look, you want to rebel? You want to cast off my yoke? You want to cast off my rule? I've established my king. I've raised him from the dead. I've appointed him. But in its first instance, it's speaking of the king in Jerusalem as God's son, and God saying, oh yeah? You want to fight? You think you're going to cast off our rule? I've established him. And the king proclaims that. And God says, Sha'al mimeni ve'etna goyim nachnatecha. Ask of me, and I'll give you nations as your inheritance. V'achazutcha avsei aretz, and the ends of the earth will be your possession, and you'll shatter them with a rod of iron, like a potter's vessel. You'll scatter them. Then v'atam malachim haskilu. And now, O kings, kings of the nations, be wise. Hivasru shoftei aretz. Take counsel. Take counsel. Take warning. Judges of the earth, rulers of the earth. Ivdu et Adonai b'yirah. Serve the Lord. Worship the Lord with reverence. V'gilu v'iradah. And rejoice with trembling. Nash kuvar. What does that mean? Nash kuvar. Penya enough, lest he become angry. V'tovdu derech. And you perish in the way. Ki yiv'ar kim'at apo. For his wrath will be kindled in just a moment. Ashrei kol chosevo, blessed are those who take refuge in him. Now, if Nash Kuvar has no reference to the Son, to the King in Jerusalem, the whole psalm ends in an unexpected way. It ends with no reference whatsoever to the anointed King in Jerusalem. The whole psalm starts with, we're going to cast off the yoke of the Lord. The nations are angry with Yahweh and his anointed one. God's answer to the mocking kings is, I have established my king. I have established him as my son, ruling and reigning in Jerusalem. So kings, listen. Worship the Lord with fear. And, Nash Kuvar, could that be a reference to what they're supposed to do with the son? Lest he, God, or the king become angry? Is it speaking about God at the end or the king? Could it be, don't mess with my king or he's going to become angry and you're going to be judged? You take refuge in him, you submit to his rule and you'll be blessed. Either way, if you leave the king out and the whole thing is just worship Yahweh, it misses the whole point of the psalm. Now, since Abraham ibn Ezra, one of the three of the big medieval Jewish interpreters, again, the big three, Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, if Ibn Ezra says that it means kiss the son, why? Because in the end of Proverbs, you have Bar as son, Bri, my son. So if he says it could mean kiss the son, it's not just a Christian rendering. There's some other later Jewish commentaries that recognize that as well. But why Bar? Why not Ben, the Hebrew word? Well, could it be that God is addressing the nations? Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 11, is a word that Jeremiah the prophet speaks to the nations, and because the common language that was spoken in the ancient Semitic world, that it was understood if you're going to communicate to the different nations at that time, Aramaic was now becoming the main language to use. Hundreds of years earlier, it was Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian. If you wanted to communicate across the ancient Near East, that's what you would use. Now, the most common language of Semitic-speaking peoples would be Arabic, that would join all these disparate peoples together, right? Well, in that day, days of Yeshua, it would have been Aramaic. Here, Jeremiah wants to speak a message to the nations in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 11. And how does he speak it? He speaks it in Aramaic. The verse is in Aramaic in a Hebrew book, Jeremiah 10, 11. God speaks to the nations in Aramaic, could it be speaking to the nations here, either using bar as the Aramaic word for nations, or even nashku, if it was pointed differently in the Hebrew vowels, something like nashiku? That would be kiss in Aramaic. You say, but what about the kiss thing? I don't get that word. Well, you do have examples of when you kissed an idol, did homage to an idol. That was how reverence was given, and God saying, kiss the Son. It could mean kiss his feet. It's an expression of homage. So in other words, do homage to the Son. Do homage to the Son, lest he becomes angry. God says, worship the Lord with fear and trembling. Do homage to the Son. Now, I'm not going to die over what this verse says because it's just a matter of translation, and the New Testament doesn't quote it explicitly anyway. But I think you can make a very, very good case for the messianic application here and for a call to do reverence to the Son.